for today's talk is taking the next step. What are my choices? So it's really interesting that when we think about choices, we see that we do have freedom, that we might not have the freedom of what is going on in my life, but we always do have the ability to respond to what is going on. And in that place, we can choose how we want to move forward. So for those of you who know who I am and have read my bio, you'll know that I work with logotherapy, is the teachings of Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was a survivor of the concentration camps. He spent 4 years there, and he really was there to, while he spent his time there, not knowing how long he would be there, studying human nature and how people reacted and how people behaved under the circumstances. And what was really interesting about how he found himself in the concentration camps is that everyone had the same life circumstances. Nobody had food, nobody had clothes, nobody had furniture, nobody had belongings, nobody had money, nobody had names, nobody had hair. Everyone had the same schedule, and still people had different responses, and they were able to show up differently. Sometimes some people could arrive and say, "You look exhausted, you look terrible, here, have some of my food." And they were able to give some of their food away. So even within different or the same circumstances, people found themselves still having choices. So this is what we're going to chat a little bit about today, about what are our choices. Because, interestingly enough, the whole of humanity at the moment is experiencing COVID-19, this coronavirus pandemic. We all have the same circumstance of what is going on in our lives, yet we have choices of how we will react to it, how we will respond to it, how we are going to show up to it. There's a beautiful quote that I love by James Allen, who says, "Circumstances don't make a man, they reveal him to himself." Wow. So I absolutely love this quote, because it's all about taking responsibility. What's my role? What can I do with the circumstances going on around me? Is there any kind of response that I do have? So there's a wonderful quote by Viktor Frankl that I want to read to you, where he says like this: "A human being is not one thing among others. Things determine each other, but man is ultimately self-determining. What he becomes within the limits of endowment and environment he has made out of himself. In the concentration camps, I lost my screen for a sec. For example, in this living laboratory and on this testing ground, we watched and witnessed some of our comrades behave like swine while others behaved like saints. Man has both potentialities within himself. Which one is actualized depends on decisions, but not on conditions." So I find this to be very empowering, and we need to take responsibility for what's going on in our life around us. How we show up and respond is up to us. It's a choice that we have. So now, especially here in Israel, and I'm presuming most of you are from Israel listening, could be others from around the world, different areas, that now with this talk of things are improving, things are getting better, there's this whole idea of let's return life back to normal. But hold on a moment. Who wants to go back to that? We've had a collective experience now of 2 months where we have been in lockdown. We've all experienced this, and some of us have had different ways of experiencing it. First time we might be all alone, or first time we might be all alone with a spouse, or locked down with our family. So we have all had an experience which has highlighted for us certain things. We might have been looking at what's important in life, or the things that we thought were important in life are really haven't been so important at the moment. We've had a chance to look at relationships. We have had a chance to look at a huge thing called time. How do we spend our time? And so many times before this COVID-19 pandemic, I would say to myself, oh, I haven't got the time for this, or I haven't got the time for that. But now we've all had time. There's so many things that have been physical things that have been taken away from us during lockdown, that we all have had time. We've all have had time to do the things that we wished we could have done. So we can't really go back to how things were. We want to be looking at, how do we go forward? What do we take from this time, and how do we go forward? And this kind of looks at the choices that we make. What are the choices going to be that we make going forward? What are we taking with us? Maybe we were commuting less now that we've been stuck at home. Maybe our careers changed a little bit. The way we communicated. One person I know who started a story time with Saba, right? Every afternoon there was half an hour where he read stories to grandchildren all over the world, right? Opportunities that we didn't do before. We just didn't take advantage of. And even my family members who live overseas, sometimes when we speak on video now because we want to see each other. So things can't go back to normal. There's got to be a new type of normal. And what are the choices that we are going to be making around that? So here's another quote I want to read to you. It's by Albert Einstein. And this is what he says. Strange is our situation here upon earth. Each of us comes here for a short visit, not knowing why, yet sometimes seems to divine a purpose. From the standpoint of daily life, however, there is one thing we do know, that we are here for the sake of others, for the countless unknown souls with whose fate we are connected. Many times a day, I realize how much my outer and inner life is built upon the labors of people, both living and dead, and how earnestly I must exert myself to give in return as much as I have received. I think now, especially with this COVID-19, it has become a time where people have shown up to how can they serve the humanity around them. And I for one, have been involved in a community called Thrive, which Lee mentioned earlier. And it has been a wonderful opportunity to reach out to people and keep them inspired and motivated. And for me, it has just been about giving. And even today is about just giving to you some inspiration. How will you move forward in these next steps? So because my background is in logotherapy, and logotherapy is the teachings of Dr. Viktor Frankl, and he is all about finding meaning in struggle. So to be able to make choices, right, we have to have meaning behind those. And he says one of his principles is that it doesn't matter what is going on in your life. There's a part of us that is driven to find meaning. This is what helps us get through the difficulties and the challenges. And one of the things he says is this: everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So we have choices what we're going to do. We have choices how we want to respond. And one of the things which is so wonderful in logotherapy is, for those of you out there who speak Hebrew, the word lama is why, right? And we know that when you ask the question why, and this was actually what initially challenged me to start learning logotherapy, is that patients would come to me and would say to me, why do I have to be sick? Why can't I have a baby? Why does this challenge have to be in my life, right? I didn't know the answers. and I couldn't help them find the answers within themselves either. So I was drawn to be able to help people find the answers to these why me questions. So in Hebrew, it's lama, why? And in another way of punctuating the word lama with the vowels is to ask the word lema. It's the same letters, but asking it in a little bit of a different way, which means for what? For what purpose has this come into my life? I can't control that it came. And for all those of us in the beginning who were in denial, it's just in China, it's not coming here, right? We had absolutely no control about that. But here it came. And the only place where we do have control is in the lema. What are we going to do about it now? How are we going to move forward with this? So many things we learn from Dr. Viktor Frankl, which helps us with how we make our choices. He says life is unconditionally meaningful. We can find meaning anywhere. And you might think to yourself, well, not in my circumstances, but we have to remember who's saying this statement. He came out of the Holocaust, 4 years in the concentration camps, and he is saying meaning can be found anywhere, right? So one of my favorite stories about him is he speaks about the first 24 hours when he arrived at the camps, and he said these were the most critical of all the hours, because if you did survive those first 24 hours, then you had a good chance of survival. So while he was in the camps and he showed up for his first so-called meal, right? He said he was standing in this line, they gave him this dirty bowl, and he was eventually dished up the so-called soup with a fish head floating inside the soup. And his first reaction was, this is disgusting. I'm not eating this. I don't even have a spoon. And he thought to himself, I'm a doctor. Don't they know who I am? He wants to find himself someone to go and complain to. But then he thought to himself, he's already seen what has happened to those people who think they're somebody, those people who have gone and complained. And he's got two choices what he's going to do right now. Either he's going to go in that direction and say, don't you know who I am? I'm a respected doctor. Or he's going to look at what is presented in front of him as a nutritious meal with protein. A fish head is protein. And that's what he decided to do. He looked upon this meal as something that would feed his body and nourish his soul and give him energy to get through the day. So that is a beautiful, beautiful idea from a story from him. And I will often repeat stories because I feel people learn and connect to stories, and stories are there to wake us up. Stories are there sometimes after the talk. We remember the stories more than we remember what the person said. So it's the stories themselves that have meaning for us. And Dr. Frankl says, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And I think this is what this pandemic has brought out for us, is an ability to, we cannot fight it and say, go away. It's not going away. It's here. But we are now challenged ourselves. How will we show up to this? And how will we move forward from this? What are we taking with us, right? And he also speaks about how people were able to see the suffering of others. As we said earlier, that quote by Einstein about that we have come here to serve. We haven't come here to just have a good time, to do what makes me happy. That is a selfish existence. We've come here to serve. We've come here to grow. And we have come here to leave this world in a better place. And each of us was born at the specific time when we could bring our value into the world. That is when we were born, at the exact time. And there's a teacher, Dr. Wayne Dyer, who says, don't die with your music still in you. You've come here with gifts to share, and it doesn't matter what our age is right now. That if we woke up this morning, it's because our job isn't done yet, right? In I think it's in David Livingstone, in the book there, they say, if you want to know if you have fulfilled your purpose in life, if you woke up this morning, you haven't done it yet, right? So if we've woken up this morning with this gift, this magnificent gift of life, how are we using it? What are we doing with this gift of life? And one of the things that he said when he speaks about the choices, because kind of like we are programmed, human beings are somewhere in between angels up here and animals down there. Human beings are like in the middle. Now, an animal just responds by instinct. It's hungry, it eats. It's tired, it sleeps, right? And an angel is angelic, right? And human beings are somewhere in the middle, right? But we have the opportunity to behave in both manners. Someone could say something to us which triggers us, and then we respond, right? Like an animal. Or we could think about it, give them the benefit of the doubt, and we can say maybe they're having a hard day, and I can respond from a place of compassion. That's more angelic. So we always have choices of how we are going to respond. And he speaks about Dr. Frankl, all about the choices that he had to make on a daily basis. Of course, they were driven by survival. And he speaks about one of the things that gave him hope every day. So he said that he knew that there was a long day of hard work under harsh conditions with minimal food and meaningless, absolute meaningless work that he had to do every day. Here he was before the camps. He was a psychiatrist and a neurosurgeon, and he used to perform surgeries with his hands. Now in the camps, he was using his hands to build railway tracks, and that was something that was totally a waste of his time, his skills, right? His training. It was just not used for anything meaningful or purposeful, and certainly not for good. Those railway tracks that they were working on were not used for good as well. So what he said is every day he looked forward to the sunset, right? He knew that the sunset was coming at the end of a long, hard day of work, and that nobody could take that away from him. The joy and the pleasure that he experienced from the beauty was something he chose to do every day. And this helped him. This helped give him hope. One of the other things that he did was communicate with his wife. When he arrived at the camps, his wife was pregnant at the time, and she went off to the right with his elderly parents, and he went off to the left. He didn't know where she'd gone. There were rumors, there was talk, but he didn't know at all where she had gone. But what he did and what he decided to do is every day he would have a conversation with her in his mind. And as well, he had a standard that he kept for himself. He would behave in a certain way that if she was watching, she would always be proud of him. So this helped him when he was pulled, and we all know how hard and challenging the situation was for them. We cannot imagine what it was like, but we have read and we have seen so many documentaries and films about these things. The desperation, the starvation, right? But he kept himself at a standard. And because of this, he was able to further overcome and further get through each day. And he said this is something that he learned. Basically, before he went into the camps, he had been studying human behavior in the face of struggle. And he had arrived at the camps with his unpublished manuscript, the only copy, in the lining of his coat. And he had said to the guard when he went for the showers, the first showers, he had said, please, this is totally worthless to you, please, can I keep it? And the guard said, it will be here for you when you come back. And obviously when he came back, his shoes were gone, his coat was gone, his manuscript was gone, everything was gone. And what he found is that now he was part of the human experiment, where he could now study himself along with everyone around him, where he didn't know when this was going to end. He just knew he had every day he woke up into, he was going to find meaning in the day that he woke up into. So on this particular day where he was having a meaningful conversation in his mind with his wife, all of a sudden he got this vision of himself standing in a beautiful lecture hall in a university and speaking to these well-fed students. And he was teaching them all about the challenges and the struggles of being in the concentration camps. And it was in that moment that he knew he would survive. So what is this about, and what did he teach from this? Is that when you have hope and when you can see a future, then you can have the way or the means to try and make it happen. So he quotes Nietzsche, who says, "He who has a why to live can bear with almost any how." So this is a magnificent, encouraging sentence, that when we know why we are here, when we know what we are living for, who we are living for, the legacy we want to leave behind, these are the types of things that help us overcome difficulty, struggle, and challenges. And there have been many. I've been through this time, this specifically this last 2 months, I've been speaking with lots of people where I've heard tragic stories. One woman in her late 60s told me she has never, and this was right in the beginning of lockdown, she has never in her life been alone for a Shabbat meal until that week, right? And then she couldn't even bring herself to think about what Pesach was going to be like as she sat alone. So it is that we have never found ourselves in circumstances that we're in right now, but we can look to try and find meaning behind them. We can't choose the circumstances. They're happening to us anyway. But we do get to choose, what are we going to do about them? How are we going to move forward with this? How will I look at the struggles and the difficulties that have happened, all of them from the past? And will I say, why me? Why this now, on top of everything? Or will we say, what now? This isn't going to take me down. I'm looking for my sunset. I'm looking for my lecture that I'm going to give. I'm looking to reunite with my grandchildren. Or whatever it is, but to find the meaning and the reason to get up every day. And one beautiful idea as well is what he did. Even although he was starving and he was a prisoner and he was worked to the bone, at the end of every hard day, he used to go into the infirmary and he used to go and visit the patients there. And when he visited them there, it gave him the sense of connecting to the fact that he used to be a doctor. He still was a doctor, but this gave him almost a sense of doing the rounds, of going around and speaking with the patients there, even though he had no painkillers, nothing to offer them, no extra food to give them. He just was there to be a doctor and to offer some empathy and kindness. And he said what that did was, firstly, it gave him his own dignity back, but secondly, when we give to others, it is us who receives. And he was the beneficiary of those feelings of goodness that he received from doing all these kind things for the people around him. So another thing that he said, which helped him in the struggling times of difficulty and challenge, was humor. So I'm sure that now we have all these WhatsApps that go around with all these funny commentaries and jokes and comics that are going around all about, and they come out so quickly, and with all these comics just to make us laugh at the situation. We have to be able to bring humor in, because we can't take it so seriously. Humor is something that helps us overcome the difficulties and the struggles that we're going through. So here's another quote that he says about humor. He says, humor, more than anything in the human makeup, affords us an aloofness and an ability to rise above any situation, even if only for a few seconds. So him and his friends who were there in the in the camps, he said every night when they came to the showers, they used to make a joke about what was coming out, water or what else, right? There were all these things. They would joke about these things. That's what helped them to survive. And he says from his hometown, there was a bank manager who had become one of the kapos, right? And the kapos, their situation was very difficult. They were above the prisoners a little bit, but they were still prisoners themselves. And it was almost like a situation of being disloyal to your group, right? But people did, and we don't judge anyone what they did what they did to survive. They got a little bit maybe of extra food. And he speaks about this certain couple who used to be a bank manager in his hometown. And him and his friends used to joke and say, look at him now. We knew him when he was just a bank manager, right? And look at him today, he's the couple, right? And this is how help them to just come to terms with the difficulty and the struggle and the challenge around them. And even I found myself joking with my children, I have adult children in their 20s, and for me this time of lockdown has been specifically magnificent with connecting with my adult children in just a beautiful way. And it's been a tremendous gift, and rich relationships have been enhanced, and it truly feels like a blessing. And we were making a joke at the table recently where the kids often say to us, oh, when you were a child, like, how did you manage without a cell phone, right? How did you ever do this or do that? And I said to them, maybe one day when you are speaking to your own children, you'll say to them, when I was a teenager, we used to go on something called airplanes, right? And we made a big joke about it. And that is what helped us just laugh at the situation right now. Because we had been in an awful situation. And my beloved nephew in South Africa was getting married, and we all had tickets to go. We were all excited. And then all of our tickets got cancelled. And we couldn't go for the wedding. There was heartache about that. So that's when we started making jokes about flying on planes. That's how we got through the disappointment and the difficulty, to try and find something to humorous about it. So he also speaks about this defiant spirit within us to be able to overcome. And each of us has, some of us have it a little bit bigger than others. Some of us just have a teeny spark of it. But he tells the story of this young girl. It's a fascinating story. Who, and I'm telling you this story because just to inspire us, it's never too late to start again. Every morning when we wake up, it means you get a second chance. Today you get a chance to tell the person in your life who you might never have told what they mean to you, to actually let them know. Today you get a chance to eat healthy, or do this, or exercise, or connect with someone who you haven't connected with for a long time. We get second chances every day. And how are we using it, right? So he tells the story of this young girl in the Warsaw ghetto. She was 14 years old. And what she used to do was, she was like a sewer rat, right? Her whole family had died, and she was an orphan, and she was malnourished. She was very small for her age. And to become part of a family, she joined this underground of orphans who used to help the people in the ghetto to bring in and smuggle inside food and medical supplies. How courageous is that? And this is what she did, and this is how she belonged to this family of other kids in the ghetto. And she tells this story of how one day she was out on the other side of the walls of the ghetto, and she was caught, and she was taken to this prison cell where she was left for 3 days without food, and they tried to torture her and get information out of her, but she wasn't giving anything away. On the 3rd day, they dragged her into this room and threw her on this floor, where the first thing she saw was these bright black shiny boots. And then she looked all the way up to see this Nazi officer standing there with his baton that he was just hitting into his hand. And he said to her, do you realize that your life and your death is in my hands? And now you're going to tell me everything that I ask you. Right? And in that petrifying moment, she said to him, she looked up at him, she took a deep breath, and she composed herself, and she said, "You are right. My life and my death is in your hands. But there's nothing you can do to make me tell you what you want to hear." And he was so gobsmacked by the chutzpah, I don't know if you knew the word chutzpah, but the chutzpah of this young girl, that he threw her out. And she survived the war. And this is the story she told to Dr. Frankl after the war. So that's something inside of her, that will to live, right? She had a bigger reason other than herself to just find food for. She was bringing food and medical supplies for the people around her who needed it. She had a purpose to wake up every day. So I think in this time now where we're thinking about and contemplating all about transitioning, how do we move back to the normal? Well, we've all had a chance now to sit quietly in isolation and in lockdown and think about, well, hopefully, and if we haven't, we can do this little exercise today, to think about, what is the purpose of my life? What am I leaving behind? How am I serving the people around me? How am I inspiring those around me? How am I growing from my challenges? What has my past come to teach me? How can I pass that on and inspire others? How can I serve? And this is something to think about, because as we re-enter into society around us, we need to have a strong sense of who we are. We need to know that we have choices all the time. And are we going to be doing this from the perspective of, I need to just look after myself? You know, this very interesting thing about the mask, right, is people get angry if they, the other day I was walking and I saw someone and I had a mask on and they didn't, and they looked and they said, "I don't have corona." So I was like, you don't wear a mask because I'm going to catch something from you. You wear a mask because you want to protect other people that they shouldn't catch from you, right? So each one of us, when we go out into society, we put our mask on, not because we're scared ourselves of catching something from others, but if we have something that we might be passing on, we are protecting others around us. So it's almost like seeing the same thing a little bit differently than how other people see things. So there is a lovely little anecdote about Mother Teresa, that, and we all know she was this beautiful, saintly, wonderful woman, advocate for peace. And she was once invited to an anti-war rally, and she said, "No, I'm not attending." And they said, "What? You're all about anti-war." So she said, "No, I'm not. I'm all about peace. If you have a peace rally, I'll come to that. But don't call it an anti-war rally," right? So it's almost the same thing, but a peace rally sounds more elevating, more angelic. And an anti-war rally has that word war in it, right? What are we connecting with? This is like our attitude, also how we respond to the circumstances around us. And we have a choice what we do. So there is another, during Sukkot in 2014, I volunteered as a reflexologist and to do some logotherapy and counseling with one of the soldiers who was severely injured. And not only was he injured, but his whole unit who he was with, five beautiful young men, were all killed in the exercise that they were doing. And he was a martial arts instructor in the army, and this was something that was very, very essential in his life. It had given him self-esteem, and it was his passion. And now that he had this terrible injury, his legs had like blown up in this injury, and it was doubted what his recovery would be. Never mind doing his martial art, but would he be able to walk and stand and do things like that? And it was such a privilege for me, and this is what giving is all about. So I went there to volunteer my time to help this man, but actually I left there with the biggest lesson possible, because this is what he taught me. And the one time when I was there, I said to him, can you see yourself walking again? Right? I also work with mental imagery, and it's all about using our mind to help us heal. We go into the body and we work in the body of through our imagination, and through imagery we're able to help with physical ailments and with emotional concerns and disrupts in the body. We're able to settle things in the nervous system. So I said to him, can you see yourself walking again? And his answer was so magnificent. I walked out of there with a smile from ear to ear. I didn't need to see him again, because he answered me, I can't see myself not walking. I felt so proud of this beautiful human being who'd been through, young man, been through so much loss and challenge and suffering and difficulty and challenge, and none of that was going to take away his ability to walk again. And it was such a magnificent moment where he said that to me. And this is something that we have choices with as well. How do we want to respond to the difficulties? Not only has coronavirus and this lockdown been hard from an isolating point of view of people are lonely, but there have been financial challenges for over 1 million people in Israel are unemployed through this time, and it's not just the emotional stuff. There are people who have also been isolated, who can't connect with their community, go to synagogue or anything like that. It has been a very isolating time. But how do we choose to respond to that? What have these 2 months given us? We don't want just to be, thank goodness, back to normal. We want to be able to look back at this time and say, something came from this. Something grew inside of me. I can never go back to who I was before. I can only go forward. It's not about returning to what things were before the virus and who I was then. It's about what were the lessons I learned in this time of isolation and lockdown, and how am I going to be moving forward to become the better version of myself. That is the kind of questions that we need to be asking ourselves. And this is what hope and vision and attitude and humor and all these aspects and elements that we've been speaking about today can help us with moving forward. So that's what, I've got one last story to mention to you about Dr. Frankl. I told you that he used to go and visit the patients in the infirmary in the concentration camps. And one particular day he went to visit, and there was one man who looked forward. Now, this is as well, this man who looked forward every day to Dr. Frankl's visit. This is what kept him alive. He knew someone cared about me. Someone's going to show up for me tomorrow. I'll be there for that visit. Okay, so what he nurtured in people was the sense of hope. How do you see yourself in your future? Right? Let's not give up, because when that is given up, we have no reason to live. So one day he was visiting this sick man, and the man said to Dr. Frankl, he said, I heard there's a rumor going around that you are planning on escaping. Please don't leave me. So there actually was a hush-hush plan. Dr. Frankl and another prisoner were planning on escaping the following day. Now he was struck with this massive, massive dilemma. Here was this man, this poor sick man, who relied on his visits every day to keep him alive. And he didn't know what to do. And he reassured him, don't worry, everything will be fine. And then he left and he just sat with himself. What would he do now? And at the end of the day, he decided he's not going. Because here he knows who he is, what his day-to-day schedule will be like. He doesn't know what will be on the outside. And here he had purpose. He had purpose and meaning in other people's lives. He used to walk around all the time convincing people not to commit suicide, of finding hope for their future, that things aren't as bad as you think they are. remember when you were this, or remember when you did that, or remember your cousin who's in the United States who's waiting for you. He would breed hope. And he thought, I can't just think of myself and get out of here in the hope of freedom, because here I already have a sense of freedom in that which I'm doing and serving the people around me. And you can imagine what kind of dilemma it was. He fought with himself the whole night, and he decided the next morning not to go. And that was his decision. And he said in that moment, he has never felt more free than he felt in his whole life. Right? So when we connect to something of greater meaning, that is when we are living our life from that space of our values and our purpose. Then that is what brings meaning to our lives. Then it doesn't matter if we are in lockdown or if coronavirus is happening outside there, because if we are living our lives from a place of our values, then we are bringing meaning to us. So we've all been affected by this, and now that things are starting to end, we all have this big question of how am I going to re-enter into society around me. So these are the thoughts that I wanted to share with you today. Thank you for watching. And you're welcome to email me or message me with, if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer some questions.
You've given us so much food for thought and really, really valuable. Is there anyone who would like to ask the Lord something?
I would just like to contribute something.
Please.
All right. I read Viktor Frankl's book, The
Man's Search for Meaning,
a few years ago. And what struck me, thank you for your wonderful talk, very inspiring, but it refreshed my memory. And also I remember he told everyone to find a goal, some meaning in the future, meaning remember your grandchildren, or as you said, your cousin in the States, or what you will do, what you want to do in the future.
Yeah.
And that really helped.
That built hope. That built hope.
Yes.
For the future. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Marion.
Anybody else?
Yes, Phyllis. Just unmute.
Unmute yourself, Phyllis. Click the microphone to unmute yourself. Otherwise,
muted. It was wonderful seeing everybody. I think it's a miracle we could all get together like this, and especially to Lee and Stan. They never